Hi, this is Brass Check, and today we want to talk about a little history and a lot of the present. And our topic is media censorship in the United States. Not anything new. It's been going on for a long, long time. And there's different forms of censorship. The simplest one is for a billionaire or a consortium of billionaires to just purchase the media outright. Jeff Bezos and the Washington Post, Rupert Murdoch and the Wall Street Journal, the Associated Press, which was purchased a long, long, long time ago by a group of Wall Street banks, and the Associated Press is essentially the linchpin to the whole U.S. media system. If it appears in the Associated Press, the AP, it will appear throughout the nation. If it doesn't appear in the AP, it won't appear throughout the nation. We're going to talk about the history of Brass Check briefly. Brass Check was inspired by a book called The Brass Check by Upton Sinclair. And Upton Sinclair is best known for his book, The Jungle. And The Jungle, which is a novelized account of life in Chicago among the working poor in the stockyards, is a very popular book in U.S. literature classes. However, Updike considered that he wrote two masterpieces. He actually wrote a lot of books, a lot of very important books. They're all worth reading. But the two books that he thought were the most important were The Jungle and The Brass Check. The Brass Check was a scathing and incredibly detailed critique of the U.S. news media industry such as it existed in the 19-teens, literally 100 years ago. And to this day, it remains the absolute best critique of the U.S. news media. Nobody has come close. It names names, it names companies, it names interrelating boards. It shows how the whole thing was taken over well over 100 years ago. And it was taken over with the express purpose of dismantling free speech and making sure only corporate speech made it to the fore. Now, I bring this up with lots and lots of academics who are supposedly journalism professors and people who are media critics, and I say, this is all great, but have you ever read The Brass Check? And they all say, oh, it's such an important book. But it's clear to me they've never read it. Because if people actually read that book, they'll see that we lost, in quotes, the media battle over 100 years ago. And again, Sinclair, it's not a novel. It is it's an account of his own experiences fighting the media, but it is incredibly detailed, outlet by outlet. The New York Times, the Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, the LA Times, all these papers, he shows how they were created, how they were subverted, how they suppressed the news, how they turn real heroes into villains by slandering them, how they turn villains into paragons of virtue by puffing them up. It's all been described, and we're coming up, I believe, on the 100th anniversary of the publication of that book. That will be 2019. I have this vague idea, and if anybody has the chops to help me accomplish it, let me know. I'm looking for an actor who can read sections of The Brass Check. And I'd like to make an audiobook out of them and make that audiobook free to the world and publicize the hell out of it. Because The Brass Check is the most relevant book to corporate media control that you'll ever read. Now, it's a long book, and not everybody's going to read the multiple hundreds of pages, but there are sections that are just hair-raising, and if you have access to this material, you'll completely understand what's going on. Upton Sinclair inspired a guy named George Seldes, and everybody should know who George Seldes is, except that the New York Times made a decision in the 1950s to ban the mention of George Seldes' name from its pages forever. Yeah, real vindictive, real petty-minded. They gave in when he turned 100. I guess all the people that who had banned him were dead. And the remaining people thought, oh, what the hell, he's 100. What damage can he do now? George Seldes was an incredible journalist. He was active during starting in the World War I era, right up to the Red Scare of the 1950s. And he was incredible. He was incredible. So many people, Howard Zinn considers him considered him his inspiration. Ralph Nader considered him his inspiration. Daniel Ellsberg considered him his inspiration. And on I.F. Stone considered Seldes his inspiration. It's a shame that more people don't know about him. We occasionally run some clips from his movie, or a movie made about him called Tell the Truth and Run, which was made by Rick Goldsmith. And we actually, in the ancient days of the early web, made the website for the movie Tell the Truth and Run, which amazingly got nominated for an Academy Award way back in the 90s. It's a very good documentary. I recommend you find it and buy it and watch it. It's one of the best histories of the United States from World War II to the Red Scare era of the 50s that you'll ever see. And you'll be introduced to a truly great man, George Seldes. George Seldes had a newsletter, this is in the era before the internet, called In Fact. And he had hundreds of thousands of subscribers. And one of the ways he got those subscribers was he made deals with labor unions. And, of course, labor unions were much bigger in the 40s and 50s. They were much more politically powerful in the 40s and 50s. And they liked the things that Seldes was reporting on. Seldes was the first guy to report that cigarettes are bad for you. It seems unbelievable that was ever not known by the whole world. It seems unbelievable that there was ever a time when that was news. It seems unbelievable that there was ever a time when that was controversial. But Seldes was the first person to publish the studies, and he was a voice alone in the wilderness. It took 50 years plus, for the 50 years, count them, 50 years, for the mainstream news media to catch up with what this guy reported in his newsletter in the late 1940s. If that's not a testament to the quality of the mainstream news, I don't know what is. He also reported a lot about the fraud in the government. He reported a great deal about waste in the military, fake wars. With real deaths, but wars that were unnecessary. He was a real firebrand. And here's the point here, he was driven out of business. Now, I didn't point out earlier that Upton Sinclair was essentially driven out of business. Let me go step back a little bit and explain that. Upton Sinclair was, in his time, one of the most popular writers on the planet Earth. His books were translated into all languages. He was a best-selling author. When he self-published The Brass Check, he had to self-publish it because nobody would touch it. He sold 300,000 copies, which doesn't sound like a lot, but I believe back then there were only 100 million people. Someone's going to have to check me in the whole U.S. And, not all of them were book buyers. You have the very young, you have the very old, you have the illiterate, of which there were many in those days. So a really large percentage of the book buying public, that a seller of equal magnitude would be like 3 million copies today, which would be a mega best-selling hit. When that book came out, all the media coordinated to destroy the reputation of Upton Sinclair. And they just, it's sort of the way that the news media post facto is trying to destroy the reputation of John F. Kennedy. Let out every dirty innuendo and rumor imaginable, make stuff up if you have to. And they did that to Sinclair as basically as payback for outing them. Now, he survived. He didn't die. But his potential for having a positive impact on the country and the world was gravely diminished. And the same thing happened to George Seldes. At some point, the government said, enough is enough with this guy. And what happened was, if you were in the military and you were a subscriber to In Fact, and there were many people in the military who did subscribe to In Fact, somebody from local, somebody from your base, a military intelligence guy or somebody would literally knock on your door and say, you're reading subversive literature. We're ordering you to cut it out. And so that entire marketplace disappeared. Then the post office, the FBI got involved. Of course, J. Edgar Hoover had to be involved with his grimy little hands, and he coordinated with the post office to send postal inspectors to knock on people's doors. Just remember, this is the 50s. This is, Red Scare time, and say, you're receiving subversive literature. We just wanted to point this out to you. Now, how do we know this? Well, we know this because of the first-person accounts of people who experienced it, but we also know it because the secretary in the FBI mixed up letters, and there was a memo written about Seldis and to the postal inspector's office, and it was sent to all the relevant people in the FBI. It was sent to the postal inspector, and because Seldis' name was in it, they accidentally sent him the letter too. So even pre-internet, there were major security breaches, and that was one. So Seldis got this letter and realized what was up. Well, meanwhile, they had knocked his subscription rate from, I think, 100,000 or a couple 100,000 down to the point where he couldn't maintain it anymore, and he had to close the doors. And he basically was silenced, because that was his gig. That had been his gig for years and years and years. The mainstream media had locked him out. I mentioned earlier that New York Times basically prohibited the mention of his name anywhere in its paper. Okay, and he received similar treatment from the rest of the mainstream news media. So, this is sort of ancient history in a sense, but it tells you that the problems that we're facing now have been going on for a long, long time, and it's why I named this site Brass Check, to honor Upton Sinclair and George Seldis and all these original media critics, news media critics, and real journalists. We still have some real journalists, but wow, they're getting few and far between. 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, I remember reading that the number of people employed in PR was equal to the number of people employed in news reporting. And I thought, wow, that's a ghastly statistic. Guess what the statistic is now? Now it's 5 to 1. For every person employed as a, quote, journalist, and I put journalist in quotes for a reason, which you'll see later. For every person employed as a journalist in quotes, there are 5 people employed as PR agents, spinners, propagandists, et cetera, et cetera. So when we reached the 1-to-1 ratio 30 years ago or whenever it was, that seemed extreme. Well, we're 5 times beyond that. Now, it's 5 to 1. So that's amazing. That's pretty amazing. But it's even worse, because I put journalists in quotes. How many people who get a paycheck every week or every month to be a, quote, journalist are really journalists? All right, they're in a newspaper, their name's in the newspaper, they write stories, they're called journalists, they're called reporters. But, reporters don't report. They repeat. Somebody gets the story running, usually a public relations agent, either with the government or a corporation or a 3-letter agency, and then these goofballs repeat. And that's what they do. They do not do anything original. They do not do anything new. They just repeat, repeat, repeat. Wash, rinse, and repeat, right? They don't investigate either. They elaborate. So they'll take a story that already exists, and they will elaborate on it. So it's a 5-to-1 ratio, 5 PR agents, government, corporate, CIA, NSA, FBI, versus every journalist. But we really don't have a journalist. How many real journalists are there? They don't report, they repeat. They don't investigate, they elaborate on existing stories. They don't do any work at all. They just put words on the page. Their editor approves them if they're politically correct for that particular media outlet, and that's it. That's all they do. They don't do anything else. So how many of the journalists we have, what percentage are real journalists? Well, I can pretty much tell you, if they work for the New York Times or they work for CNN or they work for Fox or they work for any of these places, they're not journalists. They're propagandists. So the only real journalists are, the Chris Hedges of the world and, people like that. And they are a fraction of the total percentage of people who call themselves journalists and reporters. So when we say there's a 5-to-1 ratio of PR agents to journalists, if we actually figure out, let's be generous and say that only 1 out of 100 people who are cold reporters are actually really journalists. So it's not 5 to 1. It's 500 to 1. So there's 500 PR agents for every real journalist out there. And I think that number is conservative. If it could be more. It could be 1,000. It could be 2. Who knows how high it is? But it's high. So the number of people that are attempting to do real journalism are very few and far between. Now, I've talked to you about propaganda well, censorship, really, which is a form of propaganda. If you don't allow the truth out, that is propaganda. And I've talked for years about how Brass Check has been being beaten up by companies like Google. And slowly, the rest of the world is catching on to how bad this is. There's a website called the World Socialist website. And whether you are a fan of theirs or not, well, they have a point of view. It's definitely non-corporate. Google has changed its algorithm. And in a very short period of time, starting in April, they had more or less 500,000 visits to their website. It's now August. They now have roughly 100,000. So they've gotten an 80%. Well, they call it more than 70%. So we'll say more than 70% decline in their Google referrals in just a matter of months. And it's not that they've changed. They've been in existence for 20 years. In the spring, they've had traffic as high as 900,000 visitors each month. So this is not visitors. I'm sorry. Their search results on Google have declined from 500,000 to 100,000, roughly. Now, what's going on? In the 3 months since Google, this is quoting now, implemented the changes to its search engine, fewer people have accessed left-wing and anti-war news sites. Based on information available on Alexa Analytics, other sites have experienced sharp drops in ranking, and they include WikiLeaks, Alternet, Counterpunch, Global Research, Consortium News, Truthout, even the American Civil Liberties Union and Amnesty International have been hit. A broad range of left-wing, progressive, and anti-war sites have had their traffic rankings fall in recent months. And on it goes. So basically, what we've been saying for years is not a myth. It's not something we made up. It's something that we were among the first to experience, and now everybody in this space is experiencing it. Now, we did a few things right. Number one, we didn't depend on YouTube. We created our own website. We ran the videos on our website, and we asked people to subscribe directly via email. They can't censor, well, we've already talked about how they censor email, but it's harder for them to censor email than it is to censor search results. So we evaded and avoided that problem. Also, all these people that have big followings on YouTube, YouTube can just flip the switch and blow them off into oblivion tomorrow if they want, and that may happen someday. So we did avoid that problem. However, they're still managing to mess with us. Our traffic over the last 3 years is down 80%. And frankly, I think we're doing some of the best work that we've ever done. I think our work is as needed as it's ever been, and yet we're not getting the traffic. Is it because people aren't interested? No. It's because people have had their, for a while we had our subscribers automatically unsubscribed against their will. How that happened, I still don't know. Our email service provider claims they don't have any idea. But it happened. We lost tens of thousands of subscribers over a 6-month period. And by the time we got a handle on it, the damage had been done. We're not a 100-person operation that can handle every fire that's raging. But anyway, going back to the beginning of where all this started, we have never had a free and open news media in this country. It has always been pro-corporate. It has always been pro-government to the degree that the government supports corporate interests. It has always been pro-war. And so I just encourage you, when you're looking at the news, remember Brass Check's here to give you the other side of the story, and the sites that we reference every day and help publicize, they're giving the other side of the story. They need your support. We need your support. You know, a lot of people will buy the newspaper. Okay, what does the newspaper do for you other than help you kill some free time? We're actually giving you things that will help you understand what's really going on in your country and in your world. And some of the information we give helps you protect yourself. So if you've never been a subscriber, a supporter, we have a lot of subscribers, but if you've never been a supporter, go to the website, go to the homepage of BrassCheckTV.com, go to the upper right-hand side, see that tiny little button that says Donate, and consider contributing. You know, people used to buy subscriptions to Time Magazine and Newsweek, and people pay cable bills, and people buy the daily paper. Our model is we give it away for free because this is really important information, and we count on that elevated percentage of the population that says, hey, if I want things to be better, I have to contribute. So if you're among those people and you're able, you clearly give serious thought to doing it. Now, to people that aren't able to, hey, you know what? That's okay too. We don't, we'll survive one way or the other. This is really addressed to people that do have some disposable income, that do have some extra money. Those people that are in that position, by supporting Brass Check, you're helping get this information to people who, for whatever reason, aren't able to afford to support the channel. And that's a good work. That's a good work, and we really all need to pull together. We do our side 365 days a year. We never miss with something relevant and important and useful delivered to you. It takes, believe it or not, it takes a couple of hours to find the right video, to do the background research, to write it up, and do all the technical things to get it out to you. So that 5 or 10 minutes that you experience, just like on the news. You see the news for a half hour. Well, there's 100 people behind the scenes working hours to produce that half hour. It's kind of the same here, except we're a lot smaller and our resources are a lot thinner. But anyway, I really appreciate everybody that does support Brass Check, whether it's financially or by telling their friends or just by their good wishes. But what I want you to leave you with is it's necessary. It's necessary. The noose is tightening, and without outlets like us, there will be no news. So thank you very much for listening. Good luck to everything that you're doing, and I'll see you around the internet.